Okay, let's begin Hilchas Tzitzis. This is Siman Ches in Shulchan Aruch and Chaim. Halacha Aleph. Says the Mechaber, Yis'atef bat tzitzis v'yivorich mu'uma. The person should wrap himself in his tzitzis and his tallis and make a bracha standing up. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yis'atef bat tzitzis in Sivkot Aleph. Miyad acha netilas yadayim. Immediately after he washes his hands in the morning, he puts on his tzitzis kadesh lo yelech arba amas below tzitzis, so that he shouldn't walk 4 amas without tzitzis. In footnote 2 in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, he obviously picks up on the mashmos that the issa is only walking 4 amas without wearing tzitzis. But if you were to stay stationary, then presumably that would be okay. However, he quotes Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who says, even if he's stationary, he's not walking, he should not linger and stand without tzitzis. The Ikka Kavonas HaMishnah Berurah can, and the main objective, the main idea of the Mishnah Berurah over here is that Lo Meshe Yizdaris Miyad. He should try and get his tzitzis on as quickly as possible. And maybe walking without tzitzis is worse than being stationary without tzitzis. But either way, the idea is that a person should put tzitzis on as soon as possible. Mu'umat, he says the bracha standing up. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot and Beis, when you do the atifa, which means the wrapping of the tzitzis, and the bracha should both be standing up. Atifa, the wrapping of the tzitzis around you, I'll talk about it in a minute, but it's talking about the Tallis Godel, the tallis that a man wears in most circles after he's married. In Yekisha German circles or in Sephardi circles, they already wear it from the bar mitzvah. We'll come to that soon. But the reason why you do the atifa, the wrapping of the tallis when you're standing up, because it says lochem. When it comes to the Omer, which is Pesach territory not far off from, it says lochem. But Darshinan bekoma, the drasha is not bekoma, the standing corn, but bekoma, standing up. And indeed, that's one of the reasons why we stand when we say when we make the Sferas Omer, we make the bracha and we count. We should be standing for that similar reason. The reason why we stand for the bracha, mishum de kol berachas hamitzvos sorach dios b'amida. Generally speaking, when you make a berachas hamitzvos, you should stand. That's only ideally to be eved yotz b'shteihen b'chol gavni. That both the bracha and the atifa, but the eved, if you need to be seated, that would be okay. So, for example, you're on an airplane and you need to put the tallis on, or whatever the situation may be, then, but the eved, it's certainly okay. The achronim agree, majority of achronim agree, you make the bracha before the atifa, and that's consistent with the normal way of operating. That its brachas are over lasiyos, and you make the bracha immediately before doing the action, and therefore you make the bracha, and then you wrap the tallis around you. The hainu b'shashu ochso biyodo, you're holding onto the tallis v'rotzelis atifo, and you're ready to and you want to wrap it around you. Tezehu over lasiyos and mamish, that is just about as you're about to do the mitzvah, which is exactly the time to make the bracha. V'lo yaktim b'shashu adayin talis mukupeles, but don't make the bracha when the tallis is folded. Tezehu over the over, because that's over the over. What does that mean? We make brachas over lasiyos. So if I'm going to drink, I make a shahakol and then I drink. I make a bracha over lasiyos immediately before doing the actual act. Well, so too, when I'm going to do the act of atifa with my tallis, I make the bracha when I'm ready to go. So we know the minhag is you hold it up, and then when you hold it up and ready to sort of just about to wrap it, you make the bracha and then you do the wrapping. But interestingly, the Mishnah Berurah seems to say that even when it's sort of ready in your hands, not quite ready to fold. So if you look at note number 4, mashmash im mevarich k'shemachzik as the talis lefonov, when it's not folded up, but it's just sort of out in front of you, k'shekava einu mekupeles, and it's not folded, nechshav k'over lasiyos, and that's sufficient. Omnom. However, minhag kama min ha'achronim hoy levarich ala talis la'achar she'ochsa me'achareihem somach le'tchilas hatifa. Like I just said, that the minhag is that you actually open up the talis, you put it behind you, and you're ready to wrap it around you. And then you make the bracha, which is mamish of lasiyason. Certainly not when it's folded up in an talis bag, or certainly not when it's folded up, as the Mishnah Berurah says. But even if it's sort of a little bit unfolded in front of you, one should preferably do it when it's sort of just ready to wrap around you. Halacha beis. Say the atif also, the order of wrapping is kederech b'rei odom shemiskasim b'chsusom It's like people who go about their business and they're wrapped in their tallis or in their clothes. Sometimes it's sometimes you're covered fully, the head is covered, and sometimes the head is exposed. But it's appropriate that it's correct to wrap your head in the tallis. What does that mean? It says the Mishnah Berurah, even though we make the bracha lisatif, which means to wrap, the primary focus of ituf is referring to the body, not the head. However, travelers, that they put their talis when it's sort of folded, and they sort of wrap it around their necks, and over their shoulders. That's not considered wearing tzitzis properly, sort of like wearing it as a scarf around the necks. That is not considered mu'utuf, properly wrapped in the talis. So we wear the talis, sometimes it's over our head, sometimes it's not over our head, but it's wrapped around us properly, not just worn as a scarf. The talis, Sifkot and Dalet, says the Mishnah Berurah, wearing the talis over your head, it says the Mishnah Berurah, is machnia leif ha'odam. It subjugates our hearts to Yirah Shamayim, to serve Hashem. V'ayin betaz, the Taz is of the opinion, shadaitu denochen shelo yasir hakova hakotan she'al rosh be'is hatfilah. A person should not take off his couple when he's got his talis over his head, when he's davening, after mechus rosh b'talis gamkein, even though the talis is over his head. Because of Habach, the Bach writes, the sorich she'ha talis al rosh mitchilas hatfilah at sofa. Famously, the Bach says that preferably that the talis should be on your head, over your head, from beginning until the end of davening. At least for 4 amos, you should walk a little bit like that. Kosev b'kavonos, Harizal in the writings of the kavonos of the Harizal, it says, he would actually take the talis and put it over and cover the tefillin sharush. V'ayin soif siman chavzayin, and take a look at the end of siman chavzayin. You shouldn't cover the tefillin fully. So if we take a look at notes number 7 and 8, number 7, he says that in reference to Siman Chav Zayin over there, the Shulchan Aruch writes, "Shetov shi'at tefillin arush geluyim v'nirim." It shouldn't be, the tefillin sharosh shouldn't be so covered by the talis that you can't see them, but rather the tefillin sharosh should be exposed and very clear. Because of Mishnah Berurah, the reason for that is shetam hadover mishum shekosov v'ro'u kol amei haaretz. The tefillin should be seen by everyone, and it's only can be seen if it's exposed and not totally covered by the talis. In footnote number 8 in Dirshu, he says, "V'bir hadover kosov hamachzah shekel shetachase hatalis es hatefillin kein gag." That is meant to cover the tefillin like a sort of a roof. The you have tefillin nearest melafonov, and the tefillin should be seen from underneath it. So imagine your person's got his tefillin shalosh on, and the talis covers it, but you can see the tefillin very clearly. Continuing the Mishnah Berurah, halfway through Sifkot and Dalet, B'shas Atifa, the time when you wrap the talis around you, Mechasa Rosho, you cover your head, Mea talis Atshagia Apiv. The talis sort of goes over until it sort of goes down to your mouth, and Mashtich Kolab Tzat small. So you've got the talis, you put it over your head, and the top of the talis is hanging down, and then you sort of wrap it, the whole talis around over your left shoulder. And that's considered the atifa, which is your yotze l'kula alma, and that's going to be explained more in Sif Dalet. Not like some people, that they put literally the talis all the way down until the end of the talis reaches halfway down, and then they're up to zeh, and then a nikra atifa. That's not called atifa. It's got to be where it's sort of the top of the talis is down, and then the main body of the talis is swung around over the left side. That a bocher, an unmarried person, normally that's referring to as a young man, afilu hu talmid chacham, should not be putting his talis over his head. Okay, Sif Gimel. Talisos katanin. Now that's the talis we put under our shirts. Shelanu shananogim lilbush. Afal pi she'ein b'hem ituf. Even though there's no real ituf, there's no real wrapping of them. Yoitzim b'hem yidei chova sitzis. We can perform and fulfill our mitzvah of sitzis by wearing those. V'tov lo niach oso al rosh. And it's appropriate to place them over our heads. Rochvo lekomoso, the width and length, like we do it. on his atifbo, and then to do an ituf, to do this wrapping. The yamut kach mu'utuf lefachas kadei hiluch daladamas, and we should wait there for a few moments, the time it takes to walk daladamas, a few seconds. So says the Shulchan Aruch that we actually do the ituf as well with the talis cotton. That doesn't seem to be the practice nowadays, as we'll see soon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, talis is katanus. That a 9-year-old boy, it would cover the majority of him. But and even a 13-year-old boy won't be embarrassed to walk in the street like this. Sometimes you see these little tzitzis wearing, ani yelet tov or whatever it may be. Nowadays, our clothing is considered proper coverings. The ituf lo remiza b'raisa, and the actual wrapping is not really hinted to in the Torah, and therefore the main part of wearing tzitzis is that it's actually worn on us rather than wrapped around us. Sif cotton zayin mu'utuf kadei lotzes nami das hasovrim deboin dafka ituf. So the reason why he's suggesting you do ituf even with a talis cotton is to fulfill those opinions which say that ituf is required even for a talis cotton. Those who have the minhag not to make a bracha at all on a talis cotton, rather, if you wear a talis gadol, the regular big talis for davening, we have in mind to include, to be yotza, our wearing of the talis cotton, the bracha on the talis cotton with that. In that situation, you don't need to do any ituf whatsoever with the talis cotton. So in other words, for those of us who wear a talis for davening, we do not, and those who have the practice not to make a bracha on the tzitzis cotton, on the talis cotton underneath our shirts, then l'kula alma, us, we would not need to do ituf on our talis cotton. Finishing off the Mishnah Berurah, the ikak beda be'es levisha, because the ikak beda is on the wearing of it, not on the ituf. Sif cotton, sif dalet. Machste shtei tzitzis lefonov, u'shtayim la'achorov. So, when we wear our talis, 2 of the strings, because of course it's a 4-cornered beged, and 2 of the corners are going to be in the front of us, and 2 are going to be behind us. That we're totally sort of encircled in mitzvahs. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sitzios, Nagu losis Torah mechatichas meshi. The minhag is that we have a little bit of silk or some sort of nice material. The siman sha'is and sitzios shelafaneha yilo'elim lefonov. Think about a talis. You can picture a talis. The bit that we put around our neck, that little bit over here, has a nice material, and that reminds us which is at the front and which is at the back. Because Moshe Omer Chazal, like Chazal say, Keresh shezoch b'tzofen ha'elo'elim b'tzofen. The beams that we used in the Mishkan, those that were positioned in the north, they were marked so that we always know we keep them in the north. So too, our tzitzis, our talis, we should always remember which ones are always at the front and which is at the back. And the way we remember that is by putting some material around the neck. So therefore we know that that part, those 2 corners are always going to be in front of us and the other 2 corners are going to be behind us, and they don't get sort of transferred backwards and forwards each time we wear them. The Arizal wasn't makbid on that. Interesting, I was told that Minhag Chabad in the Babich is not to have any material whatsoever, and that could be based on this Arizal, who was not makbid on this at all, and therefore it doesn't matter. Sometimes I have these corners at the front, sometimes the other corners at the front. It doesn't really matter. But the prevalent minhag seems to be that that's how every standard talis that you buy, pretty much, I guess, not in Crown Heights, but in other places, they would have some sort of material around the neck, so it's always very clear which 2 strings go in the front and which go in the back. Just quickly, the last 2 footnotes that I want to talk about today, numbers 9 and 10, 2 interesting ha'oras in the Mishnah Berurah Dirshu notes. Number 1, that he says that it's mashma that the bocher lo ha'bechasa rosha b'talis afilu talmid chacham. We said before that it's the minhag is a bocher, a young man, an unmarried man, would not put the talis over his head. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, the obvious inference is that bochrim, even before they're married, are wearing talisim. Now, we know that's the minhag in Yakish and German circles or in Sephardish circles, but rov of Klal Yisrael, boys do not wear talisim. So he says, Mikan mashma shebochrim hoy mis'atum b'sitzisav kodem anisuin. It implies in this Mishnah Berurah that boys do wear talisim before they get married. But the common heaviest das hamaril, the drashas later on in Siman Yud Zayin, Sivkot and Yud, we're going to bring Mitz Hashem the Maharil the opinion of the Maharil in his drashas, he brings that minhag that boys only wear their talisim when they get married and not before. The Toma Mishnah Berurah Sham, and the Mishnah Berurah expresses astonishment at that. How come boys don't wear their talis godel before their marriage? Anyway, but there are different minhagim. I think the prevalent minhag, certainly in Klal Yisrael today, is that most boys don't wear it before they get married. One last point regarding the meshi, the silk and the nice material you put around the neck of our talisim. He adds in footnote 10, the reason why the minhag is allowed to make the Torah is because the ikr of the talis is nasi l'chsus v'rosh, shari beged ikar nasi l'chsus v'rosh, potem etzitzis. Because if a beged is made solely for the head, then it's potter from tzitzis, as the Shulchan Aruch is going to say later on. And Orach mishum shetzorech hekesh leischal from tzitzis v'aryonis b'tachtonos. The reason why we have this is not to say that this is the important part, this is because of the rosh, and this is the important part of the tzitzis. And that's not true. Because a talis which is made only for the head, you don't actually wear tzitzis for it, but rather it's to indicate which is the front of the talis, which of the two corners should be in front of you, and which at the back. And what about making an Torah out of silver or gold or whatever it may be, as you sometimes see? So in the next paragraph, he says in footnote 10, to make it out of silver or gold, he says it's not worthwhile doing that, because that could lead to the wrong conclusion that the main part of the talis is on the head. And of course, the main part of the talis is to wrap your body and not your head. However, he brings the Igros Moshe, or Moshe Feinstein, who says, if you want to make a talis have an Torah around the neck of silver or gold, it doesn't really make a difference if you make it out of nice material or silver or gold. And everyone should behave, do what is appropriate in your place, but it would certainly be acceptable, says the Moshe Feinstein, to do that if you so wish. Miss Hashem, tomorrow we'll start with halacha hey and vav, which deal with the brachas when you put on the talis. Thank you.